So first of all, let me introduce our main speakers and participants of the roundtable. So Professor Lance Cooper from the University of Illinois, Professor Lawrence Molenkamp, who is the lead editor of Physical Review B, Dr. Julie Kim-Jones, who is the managing editor of Physical Review Applied, Dr. Priya Satalkar from University of Basel, and Professor Henrik Rudolph, who is the editor-in-chief of Applied Surface Science, and of course the main organizer, I would say, Professor Carlos Egges from the State University of São Paulo, based in São Carlos. So I would like to start this short presentation as a motivation for the discussion that we will have during the roundtable by displaying some data that Professor Lawrence Molenkamp just displayed actually yesterday about the number of publications, or the distribution in this case of published papers in all physical review journals back in 2017, so last year. And what impressed me quite a lot is that we can see, I don't have a pointer, maybe I can take them from mine if you have one which is faster. No, yeah, no, but there is, okay, here it is. Thanks. Thank you very much. So what I was impressed about yesterday is that the number of published paper in Latin America, in all Latin America, is around 4%. And this is a very small number compared to several parameters, like, for example, we were discussing about the total number of inhabitants of South America, or, for example, the size of scientific community here in South America compared to other scientific communities, like, for example, in Northern Europe, or actually in Western Europe and in North America, but also compared, of course, to Asia, which is an emergent, or I would say that it is no more an emergent publisher in physical review already, still for several years. Another interesting set of data were just shown by Henrik earlier this morning about the total number of submissions in Latin American countries compared to the overall in his journal, the journal that where he's the editor-in-chief, which is Applied Surface Science. And as we can see here, the number of submissions is of the order of 1% of the total submissions. And acceptance rate is, I would say, on the average with respect to the average acceptance rate of the journal. So again, so this number here is even smaller than what we have seen in the case of physical review. If we now move to the number of papers per year published from Brazil, for the different journals in physical review, we see that we have around 80 papers last year in Physical Review B, and just 16 papers, if I interpret this graph correctly, in Physical Review Letters, and more or less 120 in Physical Review D, which also is an indication of the size of the community, for example, in higher energy physics, and specifically in which is cohomology and field gravitation, right? And then Physical Review A around 50, Physical Review E around 70 or 80, and then that's it. So my comment about this number is that we have very small, a very limited number of published paper in all physical review. Now, let's have a little closer look for the number of papers published in PRB in different countries. So we have, of course, the United States, which are of the order of 1,000, and again, Brazil is down here, 80. Spain, actually this is Germany. Germany around 550, and for example, France of the order of 200 or 280 papers. So again, Brazil is very, of course, does not, does not show up well in these graphs. Now, these are the number of published papers per year in other in Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico, and we see that, okay, Brazil is better, but Argentina and Mexico, of course, are not doing better or worse than Brazil. I would say that they do not outperform Brazil. And finally, this was the distribution of total papers published per institution. We see that here we have USP, São Paulo, 10 PRB in 2017, and just 7 at UFRN. Now, what surprises me is that, okay, here probably the sum is of the order of 78 to 80, but if you look instead at the number of papers published in PRL, which amounts to 16 in 2017, we had 5 in this university and 3 at USP São Paulo, and 3 in USP São Carlos, which is the institution of Carlos. And what we see is that the sum here is much I would say it's roughly 2 times 16, 32, or of the order of 30. And this is, of course, an indication that authors communicate and collaborate between them, but the total number is still very small. So I wanted to start the discussion, and I would like also to invite the editors and the speakers to the round table here, actually not to the table, to discuss about these numbers, and specifically in front of, young students and more experienced colleagues like my colleagues here from the department. I would like to take these numbers as an initial point for discussion about the kind of policies that we could implement in our university here, but in other places in Brazil as well, to improve these numbers. Because of course these numbers show that the scientific community in Brazil is quite weak. It's quite weak. And the decisions that are taken by the funding agencies really can affect, I would say, positively or negatively, the future of our scientific community in Brazil. Another observation is that we have very low statistics to make prediction about the behavior of different institutions. And again, this is due to the fact that we have a very limited number of papers published. Okay, I would like to start from these observations. Of course, these are observations from a junior professor, so I'm an assistant professor here. But we discussed quite a lot during this week. I discussed also with Carlos during the last couple of days. And I think that we share common opinions about the same kind of problems that I just put forward. So please, could you come? And I would like to start by giving the word to Professor Henrik Rudolph, who served for a few years also as a dean of a physics department in Utrecht University in the Netherlands. And he's currently, or he was the rector of the military academy in the Netherlands. Okay. So we have few microphones here. Please, I hope they all work. And of course, if you would like to interact or interrupt at any moment, please feel free. I would like really to hear from you about this, what you think about this. Please, Henrik, would you like to say something about what I just introduced?
So now you really put me on the spot. Well, first of all, I should mention that I've never been the rector, because we didn't have a rector. We only had a dean, but we only had one faculty, so that was it. So I was the highest sort of academic official of this. First of all, let me ask you, are there any of you involved in administration in terms of, making decisions about this? Probably not. So now let's turn it.
Actually, we have.
Oh, okay,
we have. So we have Professor Claudio Nor, who is the coordinator of the graduate program.
Okay.
Here in physics.
Okay.
at the local university here, and I am also the vice director of the
So I'll speak to an
Department of
audience
Physics.
in the first instance. I'll maybe speak to an audience of two people. The question I would ask you: are you happy about this? Is this enough? If you're happy, and the rest is happy, who cares? By that I mean, if you produce the students and the quality of research you would like to, why go into the rat race and try to compete with the rest of the world? Unfortunately, the world is getting smaller, so we are competing on a global level in many ways. So whatever way you try to normalize this, and I believe it was also Mark Twain who said that you have lies, damn lies, and then you have statistics. Meaning that, you know, whenever you try to do statistics that is being numbers and things and do predictions, you have to be very careful. And that applies also in this case. Obviously, you have to normalize it in some way to find out whether it's comparable quantities you're dealing with. So what I would like to say is, for those of you who are in these decision process, get to know your field and understand whether you and the people who pay for this research are satisfied about this. If that is the case, maybe you should not be all that concerned. If you really want to develop that, then you should try to convince not just yourself, but also the people who provide the money, that the thing, why is it that, for instance, Germany is doing much better on average than most other countries in the world, is because their funding has been very stable. The most unlucky thing you can have in terms of doing research is instability in funding, meaning great variations, because it is not something you do in 6 months, it's not something you do in 2 years. You have to invest. You have to invest in the whole system, and it takes a long time. So I would strongly suggest invest in it, try to keep the funding, fight for that. I know Brazil has a tough time in keeping the funding constant, but I would strongly recommend try to convince the politicians, even though you may have fewer people than permanently hired, try to get this funding to be constant. So that was my speech to the audience of two. For the rest of you, don't care at this moment. Do the best you can do. Publish if you can. And try to don't be too concerned about these numbers. Do the best you can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Would you like to add something, Lance, that you work at University of Illinois?
I think you need to do a more thorough study of all the journals. So I don't know where do people typically publish? The APS journals are only one journal set. Where do people publish when they publish? Anybody from the audience? So I think to really do this assessment correctly, you need to evaluate where all the places you publish. I mean, I think the question is do you feel like you're getting the visibility that you want based on the journal publications that you submit to? And if not, then I think it is an issue that you might want to think about. But otherwise, I agree with Henrik. I think the most important thing, particularly for the students, is just to do the best work you can and publish where you can, and not worry too much about it unless somebody does a thorough investigation of all the different journals you can publish in, and whether there's really a deficiency there in terms of the publications.
Let me try probably to add some more piece of information.
Sure.
So I think that at the level of funding agencies, they do this thorough study.
Mm-hmm.
So a very detailed study of how many publications each institution publish. Actually, each graduate program publish per year. And at the end of the day, at the end of 4-year analysis, they do some kind of ranking of the different institutions and give you a final mark. So, for example, which goes from 1 to 7, basically. So, for example, the USP São Paulo, based in São Carlos, is 7, which is the highest level. We are 5. Then there are other institutions between 5 and 2, basically, and of course other who are 6. So I think that this study is there, but what actually worries me, and I think also Carlos was a little bit impressed about the data, was the number. So doesn't matter really much how, I mean, how the publications are divided, I think, between the different kind of journals, but really the total number. Because this is a sign, I mean, this is also an indication of the size of the scientific community. And one additional information which I think is very relevant to the discussion is that physical review journals are somewhat a reference for physicists. So you cannot neglect, you cannot say, I mean, I forget about the fact that we have a small number of publications in a physical review, for example. We have 2 editors of physical review. I would say it's not a coincidence, because of course we recognize the importance of a physical review in the, I would say, in the landscape of publishers and editors, of course. And I think that the numbers show clearly that Brazil does not perform very well. So I'm personally concerned, not only as a person who could change things in the future, in the near future, because I already have quite some responsibilities in my own program, but also as a scientist, because I live in this pond, so I live in this community. So I really, if I want to contribute, of course, I try to make my best to contribute. My students are here, so they listen to all the lectures, they participated. I do my best. My colleagues, the colleagues who are here, know how important it is to publish, so they recognize the issue. But the point is that we have to think that what we've shown now, actually what Lawrence and Henrik provided with their data, is also, I mean, should have an impact at the political level, which is what Henrik was actually saying, and you, Lance, as well. So I'm, on average, I mean, in general, I'm a bit worried about that.
So just a couple things. I mean, there are a couple of issues where you might see sources of problems, but you really need to do a detailed analysis. So one is, what are the total number of submissions to all journals relative to the budget, the funding that you get? And if that is, there's a real deficiency there compared to other countries, for example, you can say, look, this is obviously something we need to take up on the national level to get more funding. If there's not a problem there, it may just be that people are submitting to other journals and you want to encourage them to submit to APS journals instead. I mean, it might be as simple as that. But I think there are many different things that can be happening, and I think you have to sort of do a detailed assessment to try to figure out what the source of the problem is.
Thanks, Lance. We have
I'd like to make a comment. I'm a survivor here. I was here since the beginning. And this is not a surprise to me, this small participation of the Brazilian physicists in the publications, statistics. The reason is mainly the following. We have a late development of science in Brazil. You know, the eldest university is University of São Paulo. It was created in 1934. Our university just celebrated the 60th anniversary this year. So, in 1960, when I began to study in the university here, there was in a region largest than Europe, even there was no one PhD in physics in Brazil. So, since then we have experienced extraordinary progress. That's true. At that time, there was no physics in this region. We have to say also that in the last 2 years, we have also suffered from several cuts in the budget. So it's a complex situation. We cannot compare Brazil with Europe and the United States, because we have to think even to Napoleon, because Bonaparte forced the professor even we have allowed to have industry to fabricate things here. So it's a complex and different history. And this workshop bring us an opportunity to think about and to look for the real sources of this late development.
Thank you, Professor Yassir. Actually, I want to say that he was one of the founders of the physics department here in Natal, so thank you very much. Professor Liassi. Is Professor Liassi. Okay, maybe it would be nice to hear a little bit also something from the editors of Physical Review. So Lawrence and Julie first.
I hope this one works. Yeah. This one is. It's okay. Yeah. Yeah. Now it's clear that of course you come from a very different background. But what worried me a bit in the stats that I showed yesterday is that over the past decade there was no real increase. It seems to be going up and down a little bit, and there's no true development. And of course, this partly has to do with the funding, perhaps. But it may also simply have to do with the fact that somehow there is not enough drive to do publications. And of course you want to decide for yourself whether you want to have that drive. This is what Hendrik said. But I think if you want to have a vibrant physics scene in Brazil, you need to have that drive. If things are okay as they are, it might even get boring. If I look at, well, in Germany, of course, the funding is fantastic and all these things help a lot. But there's also a lot of exchange and competition between the different universities. And I don't know whether it exists here. Well, probably competition, yes, but exchange in ideas, exchange in fields, that's something that you could stimulate. In Germany, we had this system, which also was not the best in the world, that you could not make an academic career within one university. So you could not become an assistant professor at a university, you did your PhD, and then if you were an assistant, you couldn't become associate, you really had to move to another university. And that has been very good, actually, to make sure that all universities have the same level of research. And that's something that you may want to look at. I'm not saying to make it impossible to have internal promotions, but probably to stimulate people traveling around a little bit. And that, of course, should not only be Brazil. It could be neighboring countries. It could also just be Europe or the US. Just see how things are going on there, and perhaps get some ideas on how you. Part of it is very important that you have to pick up new results very rapidly, because that's where the growing fields are. And so you have to first know where they are, and then perhaps have some infrastructure here so that you can pick up on it. But yeah, I've been in a few places. The infrastructure is not that bad at all. There's many things that are happening elsewhere that actually could be picked up on here pretty easily, but it's not happening. And somehow that drive isn't there. And perhaps that's something that perhaps should be more pushed by the research managers.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe Julie, do you want to add something?
I think I agree with what everybody said. I mean, it's true. It's the funding. It's the steadiness of the funding. But I think what Lawrence said about interactions and collaborations, international collaborations, are important for many different reasons. You know, it's just spawn ideas. You know, you get to work together. And of course, from the editorial point of view, I also, question, and I don't know the answer to this. What is your, so to say, your overarching publication idea of how much do you push your students, your staff to do that? I'm not talking about the publish or perish part. I'm just talking about the infrastructure of just knowing that this is what you do. You do, let's say, an experiment, and you write it up. Is this important enough? And where do we send this to? Do we need to do more experiments? And this sort of thing is also very important in collaborations, because then you can ask each other those questions. And I mean, does it have anything to do with the fact that, you know, a lot of countries, English is not their first language, but is there, you know, from the editorial point of view, is there a little bit that you could improve on that? But I think, having said that, probably I mean, that's from the editorial side of things, where you have to be able to discuss your ideas and present them in such a way that the importance shows. So it's doing the experiments, or, you know, the simulations, realizing what is the level that we need to publish in, let's say, because you say, okay, that's the benchmark that you want to do. You want to have a certain representation. And then from there on, how do you cultivate that so that the students, you know, learn that from the very beginning? But I think Lance is also correct in that I don't know what the landscape is. I mean, are there a lot more papers that you submit to other journals? I mean, yes, physical review, you're right, is one of those benchmarks. And if you say that that's very important, then you need to say, okay, so where are we standing in the of how we do our research? What is important? What you know? And for that, I think collaborations are very important.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. Maybe I would like to also to include the pre and the discussion. I know that it's a different field, but probably a different perspective could also help us to, if you have something to say.
Sure. I mean, researchers always have something to say.
Thank you.
So, as I listened to this discussion, I could actually think of 3 or 4 master's theses actually creating evidence of what is going on. And that's so easy to come up with. Looking at different faculties, all the members, where they have published in last 5 years, or taking 5 or 10 top physics journals of perspective fields, and also analyzing the submissions from here. Also the authorship. With these numbers, I don't know if it counts as from this country, if the first author is from that country. So any of...
I'll just speak to that for one moment. Can you hear me? Most of this data is actually goes by the corresponding author. Okay. So it's mostly by the corresponding author. Now, of course, if you don't have a lot of international collaborations, then it's going to be the APS. We now gather data with all the co-authors, and eventually we will get to the point where we can be more fine-tuned. But those numbers are from the corresponding author.
Okay. So this already makes a difference, actually. And then if you look at other ways of looking at the author's list, probably the picture would be slightly different. So that could be the first thing. If it's just Brazil-specific data, probably you will have to publish it in a Brazilian journal. But if you compare it with another country with similar socio-political situation, let's say the age of universities, that also gives you a comparative dimension. So it's not just an exercise for internal evidence generation, but it could also have a publication out of it. That's first thing. Second, the point that you raised about universities being rather young. So India kind of has a similar picture, but we also did some mistakes while trying to get onto this horse to be with China or comparable to Europe. And one of the biggest mistakes for that is they started attaching the accreditation and professional qualification of researchers with number of publications. India is a big country, and that also led to a lot of people publishing extremely poor quality research in open access predatory journals, to the extreme that last year Indian government had to come up with a list of journals, the only journals which are approved to be counted if you have a publication in those. And that threw out about 70% of publications out of India. So while you go after these numbers and while creating a strategy, try to put these forethought into it already, that it shouldn't go down the way it went in India. That doesn't help anybody. So that was my second thought. And as they all rightly said, focus on this number, just that's one aspect. Try to find a story behind the number in the context of Brazil and what's happening there. One of the things, other things, I had a discussion with somebody. So at least in our faculty, the master student has to have 1 publication and PhDs have 3. Now that requirement itself would increase the number of publications from those countries because that's a prerequisite to get the qualification. Maybe minimum. Yeah, so for PhD we have minimum 3.
Okay.
One as a first author and 2 could be as a co-author. And these are 1 accepted as a first author. That's our minimum requirement.
Independent of the impact
medicine.
factor? Independent of the impact factor?
The higher the impact factor, better it is, but first author in peer-reviewed and reputed indexed journal.
Okay.
That's the minimum. But imagine now, if you have...
In
let's say-
Switzerland, right?
Yeah. If you have 200 PhD students across Switzerland in a particular field, you have at least those coming out of 4-year PhD. And that would make a difference too. So you also need to contextualize these kind of facts while you're analyzing the number of publications. And you have to also adjust it to your faculty, of course. You can't go by the medical norms, but you have to look at
So
it.
you just get your PhD diploma if you publish at least 3 papers.
Yeah. At least, yeah, these 3 papers, generally people publish more than that.
Uh-huh.
And our thesis is basically compilation of those publications as individual chapters. And then you put them together with a red thread by writing separate introduction and a separate discussion. So that becomes our thesis. And yesterday this was the discussion. If the library has to give an ISBN number, which they have to, so we get 2 years after our PhD defense to make sure that we have published all the chapters as manuscripts before we give it to the library to publish with the ISBN. So publications is given the priority. If in 2 years you cannot get all the papers published, you take that chapter out of your thesis because you still want to try and publish it as a paper. And then you only submit the rest of the thesis that then the library can put up on the internet.
Okay, thank you.
But this is Switzerland and it is medicine. And so the whole medicine publication world is totally different from physics. So you should not directly compare this to what's happening in physics.
Carlos, maybe you can add. Julie first.
No, I just
Julie
stand corrected. I was just talking to Lawrence. In one of the graphs, it said that it counted the corresponding authors, but Lawrence said that the other graphs didn't. So I wasn't. So that I stand corrected on that.
Okay, thanks, Julie, for that. Please, Carlos, maybe you can add something about your own experience and how you see these numbers.
Yeah, okay. So before I answer to that, let me just make some general comments. Well, first of all, I believe it's very important, this kind of initiative, you know, this scientific writing part. I don't want to be reductionist to say that this is the only problem, but I think this is really a big problem. I think we do produce in the country a lot of good results in some areas, and but a lot of those results are not summarized or put together in a convincing way when we submit papers to high-profile or high-impact factor journals, and it's something that I think we have to admit as researchers that maybe we don't really know how to write papers in the proper way, or and neither how to reply to a referee report. I mean, Lance actually gave nice lectures here on how to do that, and I have to say I've been following this for years, and I cannot really complain about my career. I am surviving here very well, in my opinion, if you scale things properly. I have international collaboration with relevant groups. We do, in my opinion, very good research. In my group, at my home institution, my students, I'm very proud of my students. My students have no problem finding positions and postdocs abroad with money from abroad. My recent PhD student just finished. He published 2 papers. One PRL, it's been accepted just yesterday, today actually, officially. I knew it would be accepted just because of, it was like yesterday we got the reply 2 days ago, and yesterday we sent it back, and today it was accepted by the editor. And he had a rapid com 2 weeks ago, which is also an editor suggestion. So we're not interested in big numbers. I don't want my students to publish 8, 10 papers. I want them to produce something that people will read abroad, that will cite, and that will hopefully impact the field in some ways. Now, to some extent, a lot of our colleagues, I mean, many people here are invisible. And this is because perhaps they are unknown to editors. I've been friends with these people, and they're not nice to me. You know, people think, oh, yeah, you organize this, that's why, sorry. That's why you get, you know, papers. Like, no, this is a professional thing. But you have to be well known. I mean, people have to know your house. And I think it's very, very important what Tommaso is doing here. I mean, to bring this work, we work very hard together to bring this workshop to Natal, and I really hope it will, Tommaso will take over this here and then continue this tradition that has been happening already in São Carlos for over 10 years. Every 2 years we have this kind of workshop, because we have to educate the new generation. I mean, it's on you guys. I mean, look at this, you know, when you have a white beard, you know, it's almost over for me, you know, it's on you. You have to carry the piano, but then you have to learn with people that have been there. So you have to, you know, be familiar with the process, know how to write very well, how to speak English very well in order to be able to communicate, to, you know, to sell your research. And if we don't do that, you know, we'll keep, you know, making the same mistakes. As for the numbers, I mean, the numbers, you know, are, you know, pitiful to some extent. If you think of in terms of, I know we're young, the universities are, I see the point of Professor Liar. But I think we have to move forward. And we have to be competitive. You guys have to want to be good. You have to want to be competitive and then not be looked upon as, okay, you are a developing country, you know, scientist. You have to be proud of what you do. I have no problem discussing with anyone, honestly. You know, I have to be a bit of an arrogant too, to some extent. But you have to, you know, be solid. And to do that, you know, it's much harder, right? It's not just producing papers by the bunch. You have to think through, and it's very important, again, the role of collaborating. And I'm not talking about the large collaboration. I'm talking about the, you know, usual collaboration with, you know, a couple of, you know, people, you know, top-notch, you know, very good groups abroad. It's important to be known, to be, you know, your existence has to be acknowledged. That's how you get invited to conferences. That's how you participate in organizing, you know, events. And here in Natal, you're really privileged because you have this institute. I mean, Professor Alvaro and Silvio and all the staff here, this is a wonderful place to be. You have a, you know, a lot of conferences, you know, people coming and going, and it's just here, you know, on this campus. I mean, this is something that we don't really have in São Paulo. We have some version of it, but it's this is really unique. I've been to the Kaveli Institute in Santa Barbara. I'm going to the Kaveli Institute next week in China. And I've never been to the Kaveli there, but, you know, I can say that, you know, it sort of mirrors a little bit the ones, you know, even the amphitheater. It's very similar because it was designed by people that, people like David Gross, right? And they're always present here. So you have to take advantage of these things. You have to, you know these people. You have to attend, you know, like the March meeting, be part of the process so that people will know you exist. And you have to be proud of yourself. And so that's why I think I cannot overemphasize how I feel about this kind of meeting. And I'm very happy that we had a very good turnout yesterday and today in the morning. And I think Tommaso has a difficult task to make this event in the northeast part of Brazil, you know, to grow and to actually involve other universities, not only, you know, the Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte. So I think that's actually a watershed sort of historic moment, you know, for us, you know, to start this writing sort of workshop in the northeast part. I fully in. I hope I can actually continue on. I'm passing on this kind of initiative, hopefully to the graduate school at my institute, so they would take over to make it more institutionalized. Also at the University of São Paulo, in São Paulo, because I think it's a necessary thing for all of us. So with that, I again thank all these people for their honesty and really, telling us or giving us advice. I think we have to listen to people that have been doing this for a long time. I think I always took the approach of being around people that are much better than me, but not to envy them, to try to learn from them and eventually become better than them. That's not, I know maybe it sounds like an arrogance type approach, but I think we have to have this kind of frame of mind. So that's how I think.
Thank you, Carlos, very much for sharing your ideas. I think that it's quite important, actually. It's, I would say, almost a coincidence that we had this discussion right now, because we are going through a process of transformation here in the local university. We had a very huge, long discussions with the coordinator and other colleagues here, and in part even with the students of the PhD and master program here at the university, to try to understand which kind of policies can be implemented in order to improve the quality of research. I would say there is something which is very specific of Brazil that actually probably affects those numbers that we have seen. Also the commentaries that we have heard during these days, which is the fact that there is quite a lot of teaching duties here in at universities. I'm somewhat privileged because I interact quite a lot with what is called the graduate program. So I have responsibilities in the PhD program, even in the undergraduate as well. But of course, I understand that probably many other colleagues of mine do not have the same posture, I would say, that I have. It is not a quality, or it is not necessarily a positive or negative thing. It's part of our, I would say, the way I grew up and the experiences that I had in the past that drove me to be what I am right now. I, of course, I want to say that I learned a lot from you, from Carlos first, that motivated me to organize these meetings. But of course, from you guys that have such a high profile in what you do. You also, I think that for me, you have been a source of inspiration. And I hope that also for our students, you've been you transmitted the same kind of positive energy to them. But again, I think there are some specificities of the Brazilian system that can affect dramatically those numbers. Let me try to add one more piece of information, and then we can just finalize the final round of commentaries from you. I think that in last year we had around, in our program, if I'm not wrong, probably Claude can correct me, around 120, 130 published papers. Am I correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So I think that from the numbers that we have seen, roughly 10% of those papers were published in Physical Review. So I think it's way too low. It's hard, it hurts me a little bit to say this, but 10% is really too low for a discipline like physics. Now, where are the other papers going? That's a point. That's a question.
Well, they're certainly not going into science or nature or nanoletters.
Yeah,
I mean,
an irrelevant
it's
fraction.
certainly not.
But I don't
high,
want to.
Extremely high profile.
I just want to talk about my graduate program, but I have to make an observation.
This was a general statement for
Yeah.
all of the papers in the country.
Let me add another piece of information from the numbers that I've seen here, that we are around 30 professors active in research, which means that the number of publications per professor is around 3.3 roughly. But if you go to other universities, which are much more established, like for example the USP in São Paulo, where all of you have been during at the beginning of this week, so they have roughly 150 professors, which is a lot in the Department of Physics. And we have seen the numbers. For some journals, they are even worse than Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte. So this is quite impressive. Now the other part of the discussion is related to how the funding agency, or actually the government, sees at the different universities. Because what I was saying is that Federal University, the State University of São Paulo is well established, but politically has a great power. So even though proportionally probably the number of publications in very highly respected journals is lower, they get much higher visibility. So I know that what the observations that I'm doing are quite complex. Probably not all of you have understood what I just said. The problem cannot be addressed just by 5 people on a Friday afternoon. Of course, I understand that. But I wanted to put a little bit more information into the discussion and try to understand in this last round probably the relationship between policies, or actually I would say, right, I have to correct myself, politics and publishers, editors, and the single research programs that we have at universities. So probably you can comment on your own experiences. Of course, you cannot provide a receipt for Brazil just in 2 or 3 minutes. Who would like to comment on that first? Maybe can we start again from Lance or actually Lawrence?
I can say some things about Germany, but it's just my personal experience. So in Germany, you also notice very well whether you are in a state capital or not. It's very clear that if you're close to where the money is, you get more money. That happens as well. With the number of positions, things are not as excessive as what you just indicated, but these things happen, and of course we complain about it, and sometimes we get also a little bit, and that's how they keep us happy. That's one thing that's happening. Teaching, we are supposed to teach 9 hours a week, 9 contact hours. I think that's similar to what you guys have to do here. In our case, we tend to cheat somewhat. We have the meetings with our students as partly teaching and things like that. But so 5-6 hours is what you really have to do. So in that sense, it may not be that different from here. Yeah, money-wise, of course we are fine, but what I've seen actually, but of course I haven't seen that much. Experimentalists need a lot more money than theorists, and they also need other types of contacts. So in that sense, Brazil is actually, I've seen some pretty nice institutes here, where you really should be able to do good research. What I see lacking is every now and then just jumping onto new topics. People seem to go on in their fields long after they've actually lost all interest. And that is something that should change, and perhaps this has to do with the way your funding system works. There should be money available to start new things. And to learn what new things are, you have to go to international meetings, and you can pick these things up. And you have to read journals. You can really pick these things up. So when all these 2D materials came, I mean, I didn't know what I saw when all these papers from Asia came in. They directly jumped on it. I mean, that's not happening here. So there is some passivity in jumping to the new topics here, and that has to change, in my opinion.
Thank you. Lance?
So I want to follow up on something Laurent said earlier, which I think is related to what he just said, is interactions between different institutions. I mean, this is something, it's no secret that the research active areas in the world are densely populated areas like Europe and the Eastern Seaboard and California and places like that. So these interactions, and that's obviously a challenge in Brazil, which is a huge place with sporadic places. And I'm familiar with this. We're in Illinois. We're 2-3 hours away from a major city. And so it's an effort on our part to reach out and go to different places. But we've established relationships with U of Chicago. So we go up and we have trips up there. Getting back to what Laurent said about being at the state capital, we're nowhere near the state capital or the national capital. So we have people that go to Washington and establish a foothold there and constantly make our presence known so they know that we're there and that we need to be funded. This is really important to do, and it's a struggle when you're geographically isolated, but it's something you just have to keep doing. So I would just encourage, and again, the issue of keeping on hot topics, you have to sort of have lots of interactions to know what people are doing. So having exchanges, not only international exchanges, but exchanges with other institutions in Brazil would keep that kind of dialogue going. And it's a challenge, I admit, given the geographical separation, but it's really important to do.
Yeah, so you should keep on going to meetings to pick up these things. I think there probably is enough money for at least some people to go places. Other things you could try, I think there are some bilateral agreements between funding organizations. I know there's something between Brazil and Germany now. These things are important, not so much to do perhaps joint research, but actually to pick up ideas. And there should be more of that, I think.
Yeah, Julie?
I actually have a question.
Yes,
Back to
please.
you. What is the role of the Brazilian Physical Society in all of this?
That's a very good question. I don't I don't know whether to answer or
Am I
not.
opening a can of worms here? It's just a natural.
I don't know whether I can expose myself too much.
Okay, well,
So because my answer
I
would
can
be
ask that
negative.
question.
The answer would be negative because it's, I would say, quite weak. It's quite weak.
I mean, because that is, as
Samir?
Lance says, one of the things. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I would say that it's very important to have a strong society. Unfortunately, in Brazil, physics, until maybe last year, was not considered like a profession, official profession. And this changed. But the problem in Brazil is that we try to follow the novelties, the things that are happening in the States and in Europe. So there is no priorities in Brazil. In the past was terrible because we made a mistake. All the physicists worked in one field, high energy physics and elementary particles. We have been successful, but for the country, there was no result at all. So maybe we are almost committing the same mistake, because everybody now, all the students want to do gravitation studies or cosmology or some strange thing that there was the last Nobel Prize. But we don't do these things that are priorities for the development of the country. Even here, even in this international center, there is a concentration in these fields that are important, but maybe don't give results at short time to the country. So we have to inform the population that physics and science is important, and do good physics, do good science. But if we concentrate, we allow the concentration of everybody doing some late returns fields, it will be a disaster. Really, if there is some Chandrasekhar or Einstein, we allowed him to do wherever he wants, but not to direct everybody to do one thing that has a return maybe in 100 years. So we are doing these mistakes also.
I just reminded myself about something that involved, and also Laura Green, who also was participating in this event in São Paulo but did not make it here. And her term as the president of America's Physical Society, she told us that, and I was, I can give my testimony on this, of the involvement or the agreement, the exchange type of agreement they had, the APS had with our Brazilian Physical Society. And I remember back in 2005, 15, I think that was the first time I saw this exchange program for students and professors to spend time both ways, you know, here or in the U.S. And I remember Michael Flatte contacting me and saying, should we do this? And then he prepared a proposal for him to come over to São Carlos and give a set of lectures. So he spent whole week there. I was then the head of the research commission of our institute. So the APS paid for that. You know, he came with his money and gave the lectures, and at that time we started thinking about collaborating on some topic. But then a year passed, and there was another call for students now this time. And this was for when a student from Brazil to go to the US. So we applied, and we already had something going, some calculus. So it was a very solid project. That we mentioned also there was a follow-up program because it would involve now the students spending some time in Michael's group. And we had everything. But of course, Dennis didn't have any papers published, right? I just told you that he just got his 2 papers published, right? And so we didn't get the money. It was, you know, turned down, the proposal. And I think it was a mistake. I hope, and that, you know, we don't really know who got it. Maybe it was also very successful. But in my opinion, there was not. They don't really follow up with previous things, because this was something that started in 2015 with him coming here, and we tried in 2016. So we had to wait some more, another year. When I came to Natal for my sabbatical for 6 months, I was also organizing an event here, and of course Michael came. I invited him, you know, as part of the program. Spent about 2 weeks here. So then we carried on with our research, and so this kind of thing, in my opinion, this kind of picture that I'm describing, I think it happens quite often in many of these research calls that our funding agency put out. Sometimes it's just maybe a political thing that people don't look for, the history, or you're trying to establish a group, establish a collaboration. Meanwhile, for instance, I didn't go to the March meeting in 2016 or 17, I think. And I think one of these years, I don't remember. And the reason I didn't go was because I sent Dennis instead. Because instead of going there, I said, "Oh, why don't you go?" And then you meet Michael there, and we don't have a limited funding here. For students, it's very difficult, to send students abroad. So it would help if we would at some point sit together. Maybe the Brazilian Physical Society would have to coordinate some kind of initiative where people could target, some areas that could be decided in some kind of meeting where not just the well-established groups would participate, people that already have a lot of money, but other smaller groups and people working in cutting-edge type physics or in some other areas could outline some plan. Because I think we tend to do things in some sort of random fashion so that you don't get any resulting force, because we're all pulling in different directions. So I just wanted to say that I just recall that story because I was very frustrated at that time because we had something going, and then at some point it stopped. I hope this program will continue. I don't know how it is at the moment, and Laura was very positive about it. In 2016, I know they organized, and I think also FAPESP was involved in this, organized a special session at the March meeting. I think it was in Baltimore, where young PhD students and also postdoc from Brazil would go give talks there in these special sessions. I remember Poliana was one of them giving a talk there. At that time, we also had a nice paper out, and there were a couple other people, but I'm not sure whether that evolved into something more concrete. And usually we don't, seems to me, with being here for over 20 years now, that we don't really go back and evaluate the programs in a sort of meaningful way, so that we can build up, from our, and learn from our mistakes. So we really have to be critical about this.
Yeah, well, I try to be briefly about the society. I guess that one point that many of my colleagues they claim is that they don't see any huge advantage to be part of the society at all. So we are having problems with people that they are into the society, but they are not participating of the events of the society, or they are not paying the society at all. And I was 2 weeks ago. I was in an event of the society of my area, is in field theory, and this event counts with almost 300 of people, 200 of people, but now we had the low public of the history of the lower public of the history of the event. It was something like 195 people, and then we are also a little bit worried about this question, if the community of physicists are really participating of the society, and how we can bring the people back to the society again. Because there is a space where people can also try to discuss issues and subjects like this, but this is not happening at all, I think. Another point is that the problem with science here in Brazil, I guess, is also has origin in the hiring process into the universities, because in my university, for instance, we have a problem with hiring, because we gave a lot of value for lectures, and for instance, papers, they saturate when you're going to apply for a job there. So people, they get 10, 50 papers, and this number saturates there. So this is very bad, because then you can give a bunch of lectures and have a lot of points, and this helps you to be hired. Another point is that we have also, I don't know how the situation is now, but at the time that I was planning for a postdoc position, then the amount of paper counts a lot. So you could do these salami papers and have a lot of paper, and this will help you to have a position, as Professor Priya was talking about. So this does not help the science of the country at all, at least in my opinion. I guess that the students, mainly the students that are here today and have the opportunity to study in an institute like this, with events that are great like this one, and I'm really happy to be here, and they need to enjoy the event, and also the opportunity to share these ideas, and the opportunity to create really good papers instead of these salami papers that, well, it can help your curriculum in a search amount of time, but not for your scientific career at all. And it's really hard to see numbers like this, and knowing the importance of the EPS journals for the physics community.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Maybe Henrik and Priya would like to add something and conclude.
I really have nothing, because I'm not even in that position to reflect on this. I have no personal experience. I just know from my research that there are a lot of conflicts, even here, from funding agency to university evaluation to global rankings. So I have nothing really to add.
Henrik.
Okay, the reason why I didn't say much is because I try to stay away from politics as much as possible, especially internal politics. It's not because I'm afraid of going into this, but I don't know enough to make a qualified ideas and estimation of what you should do. I think you should find out what you should do, and whether you do that through a society, that being the Brazilian society, or if you can utilize the American society or any other. I mean, I would personally probably suggest to do it in a South American context in the first time. I mean, Brazil is obviously the biggest country by far, but there are other neighboring countries, and there are certain, especially in the experimental physics, there are certain facilities now, one of them being now built in Campinas, as you probably know, the synchrotron there, that has the potential, at least in my opinion, to unify the South American continent in certain types of physics and chemistry, and for that matter, even in medicine and biology. And so, once again, I would rather not try to interfere in that as much as possible. I guess we are about at the point where we would sort of finish. So I would like to, on my own behalf, I would like to thank, obviously, Carlos and Tommaso for organizing this. It's been very, very interesting for me personally, and I think for all the members of the panel, especially because we've gotten to not just meet young people, but also some senior people who have given us new input in how to also look at what we do in our daily work. And, you know, a day you wake up and not learn anything is not, you know, a very good day. And that's what I'm saying when I talk about physics. And most physicists, they have never worked in their life. They've always just done their hobby. Sometimes they do that hobby 24/7. So anyways, I would like to thank you, the two of you, for doing all the work, and I've come to realize that it can be very troublesome to get things done and arranged, and I've seen the things that have been changed, arrangements, and things that we thought were all clear, they were not that clear. With that having been said, I would also, because you know, I have given, for those of you who have not been here during the day, I've given these away, and so I've given this to young people, so I'll give the last 3 ones I'll give away, I'll give to the most senior people, because they've taken the opportunity to come to the very last session of this one. And so what I normally say to the young people is that my journal, this journal, may not be the key to your success, but at least the key ring you get can hold your key to your door. So I'd like to give it to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you all for participating. We are about to close. And of course, I want to thank all the speakers and the participants of this long week of discussions. Yeah.
Oh no, he's been more than...
So thank you very much. I would like to thank all of you. Thank you.
I think this is, you did, you know, the closing already. I just take again the opportunity to thank all of you, and Tommaso, for sure, for the input that you gave us, not only here in Natal, but also back in São Paulo. And I hope we can repeat this many years to come with either you or some other group. And you know, it's always good to and have other people. We probably enlarge the scope and maybe involve other universities, maybe make it some kind of annual event in the Northeast, also in São Paulo, and maybe really, you know, try to get more funding to get the students, you know, the young PhD students and master's degree students involved, because I think that's the way to go. So with that, I thank you very much.